Section 11.1, the last section, the parabola and circle. In reality, we don't do the circle in this section because that is something that got moved to college algebra, so we won't be doing the circle. And the parabola we've already done. So what are we really going to do in 11.1 is just talk about the distance and the midpoint formula. So kind of a shorter section to finish up with for the semester. So the distance formula, I like to show you where the distance formula came from, so you're not just knowing that you have to memorize an equation, but knowing where it actually came from. So say for instance we have some points, and we have this point is my x1, y1. Okay, so we're going to have an x1 and a y1. And this point up here is going to be my x2, y2. So again, it's just your point, here's your x2, and here's your y2, and here's your x1 and your y1. And all you're trying to do is find the distance between these 2 points. Well, we have a nice formula, but where does it come from? The formula comes from the Pythagorean theorem. And the Pythagorean theorem states that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Well, so that means from here to here, adding this side from there to there should equal that distance, right? So that's what we're going to try and do, is to figure out how can we get the distance formula from the Pythagorean theorem. So this is my A, this is my B, and this is my C. And that's the C that we're trying to find. So if this is my A, if this is x1 and this is x2, so this A piece, how would I find the distance from there to there? Well, that's just going to be where I take x2 minus x1. But I still have to square that piece. Plus, then when you talk about your B, this is your B, and you're going from this point to this point. So we're changing the y's. So what's that going to look like? y2 minus y1 quantity squared equals, and then you want to know your C. And this is the piece we're trying to find, so we'll leave it as C squared. So then how do we get to understand what C is? We'll take the square root of the left, and we take the whole square root of the right as well. And you can see the square and the square root cancel. So we know that C turns out to be the square root of x2 minus x1 quantity squared plus y2 minus y1 quantity squared equals my C value. And that is my distance. And that's where they came up with the distance formula. So the distance between 2 points, x1, y1, and x2, y2, is given by the formula distance equals the square root of x2 minus x1 quantity squared plus y2 minus y1 quantity squared. You do have to have these formulas memorized. Now the midpoint is the point that's right in the middle of the line segment. And so the midpoint is the average of the x's and then the average of the y's, still as an ordered pair. So the midpoint formula is used to find the point that lies in the middle. The formula for finding the midpoint is x1 plus x2 divided by 2 and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So when you think of the midpoint formula, think of an average. Don't subtract the values, you're going to add the values and divide by 2. That's how you take an average. So let's do some problems. Just find the distance and the midpoint. I would write the formula down every single time. So the distance is the square root of x2 minus x1 quantity squared plus y2 minus y1 quantity squared. I would also label my ordered pairs x1, y1, x2, y2. So this is my first point, this is my second point. And now I'll plug them into my formula. Make sure you go in the right order. Here's x2, so you're going to have 8 minus 4, don't forget to square it, plus y2 is 1 minus 7 quantity squared. So that's going to give you 8 minus 4, which is 4. Still need to square it. And 1 minus 7 is negative 6, but we still need to square it. So 4 squared is 16, and 6 squared is 36. And it's going to be positive because you're also squaring that negative. So make sure you're putting that parentheses correctly. So 36 plus 16 is the square root of 52. Now 52 is 4 times 13, and 4 is 2 times 2. Taking out the 2, and the 13 is left still under the radical. Now how do we find the midpoint? The midpoint says to take x1 plus x2 divided by 2 and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So same thing, we'll go back to our point. We have 4 plus 8 divided by 2, and then we have 7 plus 1 divided by 2. So 4 plus 8 is 12, 12 divided by 2 is 6, 7 plus 1 is 8, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. So 6, 4 is the midpoint. You'll be using these concepts in college algebra when we talk about circles. All right, so let's look at number 2. Again, let's label our points. This is x1, y1, x2, y2. I would write the formula down every single time. So distance equals the square root of x2 minus x1 quantity squared plus y2 minus y1 quantity squared. The more you write it down, the more you'll remember it. So write it down every single time. So we're going to get x2, which is 0. Oh, watch what happens. 0 minus a negative 3 quantity squared. Plus, and the next one is going to be 4 minus 0 quantity squared. These two negatives make a positive. So we end up with a 3 squared. And 4 plus 0 is 4, so 4 squared. So 3 squared is 9. 4 squared is 16, so we get the square root of 25. And there's a nice square root of 25, which is just 5. Now with the midpoint, we're just going to take our x's, add them up, and divide by 2, and take our y's, add them up, and divide by 2. So we just get negative 3 halves. 0 plus 4 is 4. 4 divided by 2 is 2, and that is the midpoint. All right, so I'm going to give you the answer to number 3. Number 3, you should get a distance of 10 square root of 2, and you should get a midpoint of -2, -1. So make sure you can get the right distance and midpoint for number 3. And lastly, we'll do number 4. Number 4, we're going to label this as x1, y1, x2, y2. I'll skip writing the formula this one time, but you will write it down. And we'll have 4 minus 2 quantity squared plus 8 minus 4 quantity squared. So 4 minus 2 is 2, 2 squared is 4. 8 minus 4 is 4, 4 squared is 16. So we get the square root of 20. 20 is 4 times 5, and 4 is 2 times 2. So the distance is 2 square root of 5. With the midpoint, we're going to take our x's and add them up and divide by 2. And we'll take our y's, add them up and divide by 2. So 4 plus 2 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 4 plus 8 is 12. And 12 divided by 2 is 6. And that is the midpoint. Congratulations, you are done with all the material from chapter 11, and that means you are done with all the material from Math 116.